Hello there. This week, the global stage was dominated by the second summit in Beijing between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. On the surface, the imagery is of two titans deciding the fate of the planet. But as we look past the red carpets and the parades, a more complicated reality emerges. In Washington, the administration is banking on a $1.5 trillion military budget to project strength. In Beijing, the CCP points to its world-leading electric vehicle industry as proof of an unstoppable march forward. Yet new analysis suggests that both leaders may be overestimating their own myths. From China's systemic internal weaknesses and paranoid purges to America's eroding soft power and fractured alliances. The two superpowers, if that's what they are finding that the world is no longer as easy to dictate as it once was. I'm Mark Summers. This is In Focus. Well, welcome to the program. All that to come, but right now in New Delhi, it's the BRICS conference. So we go to India as a study suggests that a revamped technology financing framework could could supercharge BRICS innovation, potentially adding over $1 trillion a year to the group's economies. Now, according to a Central University report supported by the Russian Finance Ministry and presented at a New Development Bank (NDB) seminar, BRICS countries could gain up to $2.74 trillion annually by adopting a new technology financing framework. That study argues that the current system lacks sufficient funding at the commercialization stage, despite supporting early-stage research. It recommends an end-to-end financing model covering the full innovation cycle, especially for depth tech sectors, and estimates it could also generate $406.5 billion annually in R&D and venture funding, with at least 65% from the private sector. This report adds that the model could streamline innovation chains and commercialization time from 7 to 9 years to 4 to 5 years. As you can see on the screens now, Modi is welcoming people to the BRICS summit in New Delhi. Lots of handshaking there. Now we're joined from Riyadh by the economic researcher Abdullah Al Sayed. Thank you very much for being here with us. Let's talk BRICS then, shall we? The report I was just mentioning says that BRICS could get up to $2.74 trillion a year under a new technology financing model. Is that a realistic figure? And what assumptions would need to hold for it to materialize?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark, for having me. First, the important point here is that BRICS is no longer discussing commodities and trade. It's an attempt to generate a finance mechanism that they can finance the AI related from research stage to the commercialization stage. Regarding your question about the realistic side of this thing, I think it's quite optimistic because actually this 2.74 trillion, which is the economic benefit that expected to be annual economic benefit, which is actually not the expected cash flow, it's actual economic, it's expected the gain from economic benefit, which is includes spillover for different sector efficiencies, supply chain, creating new companies. But in order, this assumption, in order to materialize, it's actually need to build the trust, because what actually BRICS is lacking is the trust and the institutional factor. So the difference between BRICS and US, for example, is that BRICS does not have the trust, does not have the institutional, the strong institution, a strong legal system. So in order to achieve this one, they need to start from building good legal institution, good legal liberalizations, and then they can move towards this point.
And now the study criticizes the current system for underfunding when it comes to BRICS. What is the valley of death between research and market? Why is that such a persistent problem in BRICS economies?
Oh, okay. So if you are talking about the market research related to the
underfunding, yeah.
Underfunding, yeah. So this is actually underfunding, yeah. So underfunding of the BRICS is actually is a sign of the trust, because actually what is the difference is that you need in order to make a funding, you need to have shadow banks, private credit. You need to have a good institution. You need to have good IBO for exit. So all of this is a sign of underfund. You don't have a deep IBO. You don't have a very good shadow banks or banks in Brexit. So how you are going to fund this? You should be underfunded because you don't have a depth finance mechanism.
Right. Well, the report also calls for an end-to-end financing model covering the full innovation cycle. What concrete instruments would you prioritize to bridge the gap from lab to market?
Okay, so if you need to prioritize an instrument in order to reduce this gap, actually you need first to move from the stage now, which is collaborations, into the active market and active financial market in this thing. You know that the BRICS is characterized by state capitalism. State capitalism means that the China or whatever, India the state is actively in the market as an anchor, and they are participating in the economy and they are directing the investment. Now they need to move from this stage, which is a state capitalist system, into incentivize the private sector to participate more and to take more incentive to the private sector in order to close this gap. So they need more private sector participation, because you know that all of this, like for example, China is more of the this funds come from the state.
Now, deep tech sectors like AI and semiconductors and advanced materials, and they're highlighted as key beneficiaries. Do you think that BRICS countries could avoid an over-concentration in a few high-profile sectors? Do they need to do that? Do they need to
Yeah.
diversify more?
Yeah, exactly. You need to diversify because the BRICS. What is the objective of BRICS? The objective of BRICS is to be less vulnerable and less dependent on the Western country. So, in order to be less dependent on Western country and US, they have to diversify. Otherwise, for example, the China Constitution is actually built on the double circularity concept, which is to reduce independency from the Western and US nations. So they have to diversify, otherwise the BRICS will be only symbolic. It's not like a very, very, very real collaboration as far as if they do not collaborate more, if they don't invest more, if they don't diversify more.
And the report estimates $406.5 billion a year in R&D and
Yes.
venture funding. At least 65% of that supposedly coming from the private sector. Are there regulatory changes that need to be enacted to try to unlock that level of private capital when it comes to BRICS?
Exactly, exactly. If you are talking about 65% of this fund comes from the private sector, the state has to make a transformational and new legislation and new rules in order to incentivize the private sector to inject this 65%. And this is the dilemma. They have to build trust in the system first in order to encourage the private sector to participate by this 65%. By the way, this one, which is around 400 million billion, I think, USD, which is needed annually, this amount is really, and they are expecting to multiply the economic benefit to reach, as we just mentioning in the report, 2.7 billion economic benefit. So it's a must that they need to change. The state need to play anchor role in the economy, and they need to first enter as anchor role, and then the private sector will follow when they see the benefit comes.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Abdullah El Sayed joining us from Riyadh, economic researcher, to talk us through BRICS happening right now in New Delhi. Thank you very much indeed. Now, a major analysis in foreign policy argues that both Washington and Beijing are trapped in their own narratives. The US has been blinded by small successes in South America, it says, leading to a dangerous overconfidence in the Iran conflict. Meanwhile, China's industrial triumphs like EVs and solar energy are propped up by wasteful subsidies that mask a slowing economy. As the global deck is reshuffled, both powers seem to be ignoring the rise of middle powers and shifting demographics that favor neither side. Now, joining us is Meher Nicola Fursley. Thank you very much for being here with us. So we've had this summit this week, and of course Trump left just a few hours ago. But let me ask you about something completely different to start with. US, of course, had this little excursion into, he likes to call them an excursion, into Venezuela at the beginning of the year. That, of course, led them to a false sense of security, some would say hubris, when it came to Iran. So what's the current situation with the stalemate that's happening in the Gulf?
I'm delighted to join you today. Just came back from London, actually, and it's as cold in Paris today. I think it started well for Trump before he was dragged into the Arabian-Persian Gulf, because as you said, the Venezuela affair, the Caracas affair, was quick and easy, and it was in America's own Theodore Rooseveltian sphere of influence, or Monroe, whatever sphere of influence. But I'm coming at Trump was very disciplined in the first 11, 12 months of his second presidency. So he said, no war of choice, no faraway war. I'm going to focus on the industrial economic rivalry with China, and I'm going to develop America's might and power in my own sphere of influence, stretching from Greenland to southern Argentina. And all of a sudden, at the end of February, he broke his own rules. So he did the complete opposite of what he stood for, and he went for the war of choice, very far from his home base. And in military affairs, like it or not, Trump or not, the further you are from your own base, not only for logistical reasons, for many reasons, the more complicated the war gets, right? And it's something, American military planners seem to have forgotten, right? The Arabian Persian Gulf is very far from their base, and they had small bases, quote unquote, in Europe, and they realized, to their great astonishment, that on February 27, when they called, Paris, London, and Berlin, and Rome, most Europeans said, no way, Jose, we will not let you use bases on Italian or French soil for your Arabian Gulf adventure. And so it was a shock for America. But to make a long story short, yes, in the past 4 months, America accumulated two things in the Arabian Persian Gulf. So let's call it the third Gulf War, right? So that third Gulf War is sweet and sour. It's a mixed bag. It's gray. So America accumulated a series of small tactical victories. And let's be honest, the Iranians also lost a lot in the past 4 months. But it was not, things are not going as planned.
Okay,
so it's not
let me ask you, let's talk about this meeting particularly, the way that the two men interacted with each other. What was your take on that? Trump, of course, flattering, he's always the same, lots of flattery. My friend, you're a strong man, you're a great leader. What was the response, do you think, like from Xi Jinping?
So you're right, it was almost cartoonish. And the reason why it was almost cartoonish is the characters are so different, dissemblable. And behind the characters, it has become a dirty word in the West, but in China or India, it is still a very important word, ideology. So for the Chinese, what comes first is not money or AI or even military might. It's ideology, right? So Chairman Xi Jinping is a guy who really, it's not for show, right? He really spends 4 or 5 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, reading arcane geography, history, and philosophy treatises from the 19th century, right? So he believed
was that Trump or Xi Jinping? I can't quite tell from that description.
Xi Jinping. So Xi Jinping. And so for him, it matters a lot, reading, knowing geography and history. And of course, what's going on, the situation now in the Persian Gulf is due to what? To many historic and geographic mistakes the Americans made. The Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, is a big geographic asset. If you don't know the geography of the Arabian Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, you are easily fooled by who? You're easily fooled by NATO or by Israeli military planners who can lie to you. And they can lie to you into what? Into war. And I think, the Chinese consider that, an honest statesman, a smart statesman, has to be well-rounded in geopolitics, geography, history, and philosophy. Trump is the complete opposite. Not only is he a real estate salesman, so the core force or the core strengths of Trump, he knows how to sell expensive deluxe condominiums, and he's very good at that. He's also a creature of CNBC. He's a creature of American network TV, and more precisely, he's a creature of reality TV. And what is reality TV? By definition, reality TV is 99% fiction. It's fake reality. It's manufactured reality. And Trump is very good at that. But his culture couldn't be further from Xi Jinping. And of course, when they met, my perception, so I have no state secret to share with you, but my perception is that the meeting was not well prepared because, Scott Bessent met with his Chinese counterparts 2 weeks earlier. Marco Rubio had 2 or 3 phone calls, but he was not well prepared. And it means that the only way out of the summit is the facade. So both the Chinese and the Americans insisted on the facade because they knew there was not much substance. So to make a long story short, nothing much came out.
Many of some people would say it was a grift, an attempted grift for Trump's friends and family who all went on the plane with him, Elon Musk, his son Eric, who runs the Trump empire at the moment, all to try and make money. Boeing, of course, were there as well. Whereas I think the Chinese perhaps saw this meeting in slightly different terms. But I wanted to read you a quote from what Trump said. Of course, he did an interview with Hannity on Fox News whilst he was there, and made several claims. And he talked about Xi Jinping. He says he's a warm person. He's central casting. He's very tall, especially for this country, because they tend to be a little shorter in China. The military march was incredible. So he was like laying it on thick. But he also said that the Chinese had offered to help him clear out the Strait of Hormuz, which was later walked back a bit by Marco Rubio. Do you think the Chinese were offering help to sort out America's mess in the Gulf?
Yes and no. Yes and no. So I think the Chinese, very coldly, because they're very, they are really 19th century Marxist, no one reads Feuerbach today, but, Ludwig von Feuerbach, an arcane, German anthropologist and philosopher, today in Mandarin Chinese, his works are bestsellers in Beijing, right? And so the worldview is cold, rational, ultra-rational, cold, no feelings, no hard feelings, no love, nothing. Very cold and calculating. This is the Feuerbachian Leninist worldview in vogue in the highest echelon of the Chinese Communist Party. And so they probably told him, if you want us to offer you a way out of the Strait of Hormuz chaos you created, quote unquote, this is the price tag. We want you to do this, and that in advance, and then we'll help you. And I think Trump was probably shocked because he wasn't expecting the Chinese to be as cold and calculating and brutal, basically, because Trump himself, he fancies himself as a new Theodore Roosevelt, a new Nixon. So what does it mean if you're American? If you say I'm a new Nixon, I'm a new Theodore Roosevelt, it means I'm brutally cynical and pragmatic. I want to get rid of all the niceties and stupidities of George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Tony Blair, Hillary Clinton. I'm a different kind of leader. And many American voters believed him. So they wanted someone who would be calculating, cynical, and America first. What does it mean, America first? You put your own interest above the interest of NATO or Israel or whatever. And in the past 4 months, Trump was perceived by his own voters, or by many of his own voters, of having completely abandoned everything he stood for, and that's very dangerous for him. Something else, the choice of Hannity. Hannity is really an imbecile, but it's interesting. So, the choice of Sean Hannity, who's a completely illiterate idiot, really. And I'm not saying this from a Democrat. So I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a liberal. But even if you're not a left-wing, whatever, liberal, Hannity is an imbecile. He's an idiot. So the choice of Fox News, and Fox News has different calibers of intellectuals or journalists, but Hannity would be really at the bottom of the pile, right? So the choice of Hannity to discuss something very, very delicate, very nuanced, very, very important, is in itself the wrong choice. So I think, honestly, it's the wrong outlet, and it sends a message that Trump himself perhaps did not take the measure and the importance of the meeting.
But of course, you have Trump's attitude, and he's always very impressed with people like Xi Jinping because of the strength of the leader, because he can stay on for quite a long time and extend your term limits, and human rights aren't quite a thing. Trump loves all that and would like to be that kind of leader. But was anything achieved more than that? Because, of course, trade is one of the big problems, or one of the big sticking points between China and the United States. We had all the tariffs on and off with that as well. And, of course, China's a big industry. I mentioned it at the beginning, electric vehicles really going massive in Europe. But America, no, they're trying to keep Chinese cars out, but they are booming. I know here in Egypt, the Chinese cars are very, very prevalent and getting more so in Europe. America, no. Are they going to move forward with that kind of thing? Is the American market going to open up to Chinese cars?
Well, you're putting your finger on the real issue here. This is the heart of the issue. So once again, during his campaign, so 18, 19 months ago, during the campaign for the second presidency, Trump ticked all the boxes, and he surrounded himself, by the way, with people like J.D. Vance, with people like Tulsi Gabbard. These are real Nixonians, real Theodore Rooseveltian believers in industrial policy and economic nationalism. And what is the recipe for Chinese success? It is precisely that: nationalism and long-term industrial planning. And America and France and Britain, we abandoned that 50 years ago. 50 years ago, we said that long-term planning is stupid. We said the best thing is to have every quarter, capitalist companies, every quarter, every month, every week, have them release their net profit margin, and all the rest didn't matter. That, long-term planning was Gaullist or Nixonian or even worse, Brezhnevian and evil. The Chinese did the opposite, and they won, and they are winning. So during the campaign 18 months ago, people like Tulsi Gabbard, people like Robert Kennedy Jr., people, once again, like J.D. Vance said, we can do this. We can fix it. We can improve the American economic model by having the perfect combination of free market economics and long-term industrial planning. And many people believed Trump because he embraced that discourse. And sadly, in the past 4 or 5 months, Trump himself seems to have completely thrown away Nixonian economic nationalism, and he seems to have reverted to the silly, Fox News, Hannity, wave the magic wand of neoliberal, whatever, short-term profits, and everything, all the problems, all the issues, they will sort themselves out by magic, by, Reagan, Thatcher, George W. Bush magic. And many people are troubled because if you want to compete with China, if you're serious about, industrial revival, that is not the way you behave.
Of course, the relationship between the two gentlemen and what they must think of each other, I always wonder about that. What do you think Xi Jinping really thinks of Donald Trump? Of course, Xi gave a speech, and he was talking about, let's not be rivals anymore. He was a very serious speech about geopolitical events. And then Trump gave a speech saying there were lots of Chinese takeaways in the U.S. and went on a riff about how much Chinese takeaways they were, which, to be fair, inspired me to get a takeaway last night. But do you think Xi Jinping just looks at Donald Trump and doesn't take him seriously as a leader?
I think until February of this year, until the end of February of this year, the Chinese elite had some respect and admiration for Trump, in spite of what they perceive him as vulgar, right? They perceive him as very vulgar. They hate reality TV. They think The Apprentice is for idiots. So in spite of the shallow discourse and the antics, they had a lot of respect, and they feared Trump precisely because of what I told you earlier: economic nationalism, long-term industrial planning. Because the Chinese, they despise Tony Blair, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney. The Chinese believe that when the West is ruled by people like Macron, von der Leyen, George W. Bush, it's great for them, right?
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to cut you off there, Nick, because we are out of time. But thank you very much for your input. Always good to have your views, especially when it comes to the relationship between China and the United States. Nick Firsley from the EU SEN Centre. Have a very good weekend. So as the summit ends in Beijing, we're left with a clear picture. While China can win a rare earth skirmish, It cannot win an economic war against the united West, or can it? Well, it remains to be seen. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.